I'm excited to have a conversation with our underwriters here who have a lot of experience in helping agencies modernize IT infrastructure, approach to security, overall integration of systems. So I'm just going to have everybody, let's just do a brief introduction, your role within your organization, and maybe how your organization is helping agencies modernize at a high level, and then we'll get into details.
Yeah, so Mark Fox, Amazon Web Services. Started out the business here about almost 9 years ago, starting our defense business. That's grown now where I spend the bulk of my time supporting the expansion and growth of our defense business out into our international partners. And really what we've seen here over that course of really sort of the duration of cloud as it's been in the federal space is, we joke about it with folks going in years ago to folks that I knew within the Navy and others that said, what are you doing with Amazon? Are you here to sell us books into the Naval Academy or something, right? So it's gone from that initial conversation to now where we're actually moving into the phase of those initial projects to do public facing, low risk projects. We've now moved into the second big wave, which is sort of enterprise business systems. We're seeing things like ERP, HR, manpower systems come over. And we're now moving into the next phase, which is the adoption of true, in the world I live in, sort of a warfighter C2, C4 ISR system. So that's the area that we're seeing here domestically. Part of what I do is to try to speed up that 8 or 9 year path internationally and take a look at the lessons learned that we've done here domestically.
Awesome. Rick?
Yeah, so I'm Rick Piña. I'm the public sector CTO for Worldwide Technology. I've been at Worldwide for a little over 4 years. I retired from the Army after a 25-year career, and I retired as the Army CTO. So I bring kind of like that customer perspective to Worldwide. For those of you not familiar with Worldwide Technology, we grew up as a reseller. So in the early days as a reseller, not really adding a lot of value, but now we're a technology integrator. So we partner with all of the OEMs, and so we can pretty much offer anything that you can find in Silicon Valley, Seattle, Boston, or Austin. We integrate all of that technology, running the gamut, and then we deploy it with our customers. So we really focus on integrated solutions. That's kind of where we focus. And then I'll talk about today maybe how we look at customer gaps and opportunities, what's happening in industry. We help our customers kind of make sense of it all and then bridge the gap. So if we can help a customer understand emerging technology and how that emerging technology can meet a known gap and opportunity within their space, we're adding value. That's kind of what we do every day.
Oh, my turn?
Yep, you're up.
I'm Stephen Kovac. I'm Vice President of Global Government and Chief Compliance Officer for Zscaler. First of all, thank you all for inviting me to come, and my panel members, thank you. So for those who don't know Zscaler, Zscaler, we run the largest security as a service cloud in the world. If you look at Zscaler as a company, we've been around for about 12 years, purpose-built, born and bred in the cloud. About 3 years ago, I joined Zscaler with one mission. Number one is you to be selling in federal, you must have FedRAMP. Number two is my background is all around TIC and Trusted Internet. MTIPS is an ex-Verizon guy. It's part of the build there. And so the idea of when you run the largest security cloud in the world, you want to go into federal. Number one, I got to get FedRAMP. Number two, we have to deal with the Trusted Internet MTIPS issues. So over the last 3 years, our goal has been to build a business that fits the policy of federal and meets needs. As we migrate apps to the cloud and we become more of a cloud, cloud first environment, cloud smart, I guess is the new term environment. The biggest inhibitors for us have been policy, have been how do you go to the cloud when I got to be backhauled to a perimeter first, right? It's very tough. So we really focused our efforts in changing that in modernization. So for me, the goal today will be to talk about how do you modernize from old world policy and old world perimeter to a direct to the cloud model. And luckily, I got two of my partners sitting next to me, so it's great to be up here with my partners. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And so kind of diving into that, modernization means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, to a lot of different agencies. Obviously, we know OMB, either from the previous administration transitioning to this, there is a strong push to modernize IT systems. What does that mean for data? How do we protect that? What does that mean for actual mission outcomes? So why don't we focus on the why behind it all first? What problems do you see agencies trying to tackle as they're thinking through modernization? You want to start with Stephen, and then we'll work our way back this way?
Sure. I think modernization is a pretty general term. I want to know what we're modernizing. We have that discussion. I'd like to get more detailed. But at the end of the day, modernization, if we look at where we're going, it is obviously getting away from this legacy built, owning your own environment, to cloud methodology, to everything as a service methodology, as much shared services as possible. The problem, I think, when you said what does it mean for different agencies and the why is, if you're DOJ, I see my DOJ guy over in the room, if you're DOJ, modernization is going to be a slower path than if you're SBA. Right, because you have to rank risk and modernization have to be ranked one and the same. Right, I'm willing to modernize, but I can't do it at the risk of my client base or the citizen. So yes, we need to make it better. We need to make it easier. We need to make it more efficient. But at the same time, we need to understand which in every step is there. So you say, why is it so important? It's so important because the world has changed and we continue always to fall behind. If you look at where corporate America is today and what they're doing versus what we do in federal, and I've been federal pretty much my whole career. And I think we can catch. I think there's ways to catch up, but there has to be the reason to take a risk. And I'm not saying that we all shouldn't modernize. I'm just saying we should know that path. So to me, yes, modernization is important. The why, because we have to move to this environment if we're going to be better, if we're going to sustain where technology goes in the future. But we need to do it in a very methodical, thought through methodology.
Rick, modernization, you guys are helping modernize agencies in a lot of different ways. You have the Advanced Technology Center. You're bringing customers into the environment to actually look at those gaps. What problems, as you're having agencies come in, what problems are they finding that they're trying to tackle or solving?
Well, I guess from an education and exposure perspective, we're helping IT professionals really kind of get to the heart of whatever their mission is, right, as an organization. So I've been in this field for a few years, and a long time ago, network infrastructure or any type of IT infrastructure was just modernized every 3 to 5 years. It's just something that has to happen, whether or not that's connected to a mission outcome or not. I would say that today, the customer, obviously I came out of the military, so the customer being the warfighter, but whether that's a business unit or et cetera, the customer is more exposed to technology and the understanding of how dependent the customer is on the technology is greater, right? So the relationship between the actual business unit, the customer, and the IT professionals or cybersecurity professionals is closer. So today, the conversation around modernization is really about producing some type of outcome, whether it be a mission outcome, an operational outcome, a fiscal outcome. Hey, is the infrastructure that I have today, is it inadequate? Is it incapable? And so what must I do to enable this organization to be decoupled from those limits? Maybe that's why we're talking about cloud. Maybe I want to get into an environment where I can scale, quickly, where I can move and have the flexibility and security. But really, I think that today, the modernization discussion is much different than it was in the past, in that before it was just more of, hey, we're coming back around. There's a new box, there's a new widget, there's a new version, where today we're actually talking about producing some type of outcome.
Mark, obviously you have a lot of experience on the DoD side, but do you see differences between DoD and civilian in terms of, how, obviously, as Rick mentioned, the DoD is focused on, better warfighting capability and better warfighter experience. Civilian side, it's internal, whether it be case management, user experience, or citizen services. Where are you seeing in terms of, the big challenges that agencies, and why is Amazon in the business of helping them do that?
Yeah, I think to mimic what Rick said, that is common, whether it's a civilian agency or a defense agency, it is about the mission. The missions are slightly different. When you get into the pointing into the spear of the mission that we have in DoD is going to be probably the most different than, let's say what the IRS's mission is at the end of the day. But they have their customers. DoD has their customers. And typically this whole construct around modernization, you go back to the why, right? Who is the customer? What is the mission that's being done? And if you really keep peeling it back and it gets to the heart of typically what are the three things that come up, and I suspect it's in any of our conversations with the end customers, is it oftentimes will start with cost. And especially if you go back a number of years, this sort of modernized IT, which under the covers oftentimes is driven by cloud, the conversation started with cost. And I think the gentleman there from State actually hit the nail on the head. Yes, we're all happy to come take the meeting and talk to you folks in the agencies if we have an opportunity to talk about total cost of ownership and savings around cloud. But typically the next discussion area is around, I need to be faster, right? And you can understand what that means from a warfighter perspective and from a, the situation where I'm the customer of an IRS, I want to be able to be faster and easier when I do my taxes. And I'm very happier to come in and talk about being able to be faster, support Agile, support DevOps. That puts a little bit bigger smile on my face. And then the last piece of it is typically this discussion around, but I'm concerned around security. And slowly that tide has changed. And what I would say is in the modernization efforts, if the discussion doesn't literally flip into a 180, where over the period of time, and it's not a weeks, months long effort, oftentimes it's a years long effort, where the agency comes back and understands this modernization using these modern IT tools, et cetera, that the number one reason, the best outcome I can get is if done properly, and I put that disclaimer in there, right? I think you guys can back that up. You have an opportunity to be more secure in this modern IT environment that's enabled by cloud. Typically, those customers will have proven over the course of a pilot or two or three that they can be faster. And then the conversation will typically end with, and if I do it properly, I might even save some money, right? We know that the agency, be it DoD or civilian, is now at the right place, at least from that regards, to be able to move forward in a modernization effort. And I think now on the cost savings piece, as people are becoming more and more mature and they're moving beyond really using cloud basics, let's just use some compute in the cloud or some storage in the cloud. We're now seeing the opportunity to move to the next level where people are doing containerization, right? They're doing serverless compute. That's where you have the opportunity as you optimize your initial forays into the cloud to really now start to see the cost savings that initially drove people to us that people really, I don't think, experienced heavily to the significant degree that they thought going back even 5 years ago.
Well, and I think that, I think everybody on this panel and probably the audience agrees that, technology is there. It's not really a technology issue. Certainly if you think about security, it's a risk management issue. The gentleman from state, in terms of he's got to keep the lights on while also trying to modernize, which Alan Thomas gave a great example of, how do you maintain the plane, fix the plane while flying the plane? So what's the change management necessary in order to do that? I mean, beyond the funding, and the last panel gave a lot of great examples of, in terms of some innovative approaches that I think government is really trying to, move towards. What is change management look like in terms of actually, starting a pilot to scaling that out to a true, either a project or enterprise modernization solution? I throw it out to anybody that wants to raise their hands and jump on that grenade first.
Sure. Yeah. So obviously, from an ITSM perspective, there has to be some type of connection, just like the previous panel that was talking about some type of iterative relationship and connection between the vendor and the actual customer, and how that's more becoming the norm, within the government. At least we're trying to. And they actually had some pretty good things to say about, acquisition reform and being flexible. Along those lines, from an ITSM perspective, if you are going to deploy anything that's innovative and anything that's going to impact the warfighter or the customer and actually be an enabler, then you have to be tied in to the customer on a regular basis. They have to be part of it. They have to see this as an operational capability. There has to be something that you track, going back to military terms, like a weapon system, so that this is not just something that an IT professional is doing behind the door. This is actually part of my capability, something that I'm wedded in, something that I want to know about. So if it's not working, if it's going to hinder or impact my ability to perform whatever my mission is, whether it be citizen services, federal services, or et cetera, or some type of operational mission, then they have to be tied into it. So this is a completely different paradigm to the way that IT was managed in the past. If IT is actually going to be tracked as an operational capability, it has to be part of a different discussion.
I have a little agree, but a little bit of a different approach to it is, I don't know how you guys feel, but how many times I sit with customers and say, this is the greatest thing, I want to do a pilot, but of course I won't get approval to do it because either ONB, DHS, or DISA is not going to allow me because it doesn't meet the model, right? So I think one of the things we look at, and many times as we do a lot of pilots for customers and we do a lot of early innovation change management, is help develop not only just the plan around how it's going to roll out, how it's going to work, but also what's the policy, how are you going to get around the policy, how are you going to work either with DHS or DISA, whoever your governing agency, whoever governing body is, to make sure that it's just not a pilot that becomes a pilot that just sits there and dies out. Right? There has to be a long-term plan. And you talk about change management, program management, what you want to call it. I view it as, if you have the plan to do the modernization, you have to make sure every single doorway along the way has got a key to open. Because if not, you get shut down. That's frustrating for you. It's frustrating for the agency. It's frustrating for the vendor. It's frustrating for everybody, because everybody works to build this wonderful solution. Now, you and I struggle with this. Everybody wants a wonderful solution. At the end of the day, someone says, well, we can't move forward because OMB says X or DISA says Y. And I think that's key, is to making sure that we address those things, because modernization, as I said earlier, again, modernization comes with more than just changing out boxes, as you've pointed out. It is a total philosophy change, which starts with not just the agency and not just the partner, but government as a whole. And you have to change. And that's the whole modernization process. The problem is, we write great papers, we issue great memos about modernization, and what happens then, right? Finally, DHS changed to 3.0, right? Hopefully JRSS will be addressed. But these things have to be, we have to have plans.
If I could just add to that, I would just say, going back to my point, and I think it lines up with what you said, this is why the conversation has to just get out of the CIO channels. It can't be a CIO, CTO, CISO discussion.
A memo.
Right. It has to be something that goes up to the secretary of the agency, to the actual leader of the organization. And it has to be something that they buy into.
And down to procurement. So everybody agrees, and procurement goes, well, I can't buy it because of this line and this.
Absolutely. Right. But if the secretary is behind it, and we can get past those things, we can get past, the policy can change. But if it's just a CIO, CTO, CISO type of initiative, then it may be business as usual.
Yeah, so I'll state some of the obvious here, and some of it was repeated earlier this morning. I think Alan hit the nail on the head. We typically don't have problems getting support at the flag SES senior level. Yeah. They want to modernize. They want to do digital transformation. They're all in. They're up here on panels. They're saying all the right things. We also don't have problems with, and again, I'll put sort of the military hat on for, on the Navy side of it, the newer folks that are out there. They grew up in a digital world. It's that big middle that's having the challenges with it. So how do you get that big middle that's at the 14, 15 level, that are the ones that are going to make things happen? There's a couple things that are out there, and I'll sort of steal from what we do internally, as I think a fairly innovative company, is the utilization of something that we refer to, and it's fun to go look it up, what we refer to as 2 pizza teams. The organization of the team that you put together to go tackle a project, a pilot project or whatever, if there is more people than 2 pizzas can feed, it's too big. Plenty written about that, right? The other part of that is that needs to be a very diverse team, folks that can affect policy. So whenever we go and we talk about putting the team together at a customer site, I look around and I go, who's here from acquisition? Where are they? If they're not there, then we need to stop and reset. Who's here from legal? Wait a second, this is a mission-focused system, or it's an IT business system. The IT people, I'm not too worried about them, right? So I think getting a very diverse, small organization that is a single-digit group, somewhere between 5, 6, 7 people, is the right size to go execute it. You've got to get buy-off at that middle layer. How do you get that big middle layer to buy off? It's education. And, if they don't understand what's happening, in this modern digital world, and if any of us think that it's going to slow down, we know it's not. So, that's a significant part of this, is the training, the utilization of what we internally would refer to sort of 2 pizza teams to get these things going, are mechanisms that are in place that I think that the government can adopt as well.
So you mentioned policy, and that's certainly critical to moving agencies forward, whether that's making actual guidance and requirements versus here are best practices that agencies, can learn from each other and share with each other. There's a couple that are specific to modernization, which you mentioned, TIC. as well as, from a security perspective, zero trust. There's been some guidance, around that, standards from NIST in terms of risk management. So looking at IT modernization, are there other policies or looking at these policies that can help agencies and that can kind of drive agencies to have faster change?
Obviously, the TIC 3.0 is huge. I mean, everybody here knows that was how important that was. I mean, nobody goes to a hotel and calls back to their home to go out to the internet, right? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. The change there of being able to direct to the cloud, to be able to have flexibility, huge step. Zero trust is not a policy, but it is definitely it's in the right direction. I think we all, if I probably asked everybody in this room what does zero trust mean, everybody in the room would give me a different answer. I think it will. These are things that I think that the great news is in 10 years, you've seen more happen in the last 12 months than you've seen in the last 10 years. So what's the next one? I think we have plenty on our plate with the two that just got changed. I think DoD, we talked DoD. I think if you look at DoD, there's soon to follow. They've got to modernize JRSS. They've got to modernize how to get data to the warfighter. I mean, I always tell customers, our enemies are fighting us with WhatsApp. Yet we build, $1 billion infrastructure so we can VPN back to the States so we can get internet connection. Does that make sense? So what policies are going to change? There's plenty out there that we can look at. I think whatever we look at, it needs to be rescinding what we put in place before. And this is the problem we've had. I'll finish here because I'm short on time. What we've done in the past is change a policy, but not rescinded the previous policy. What is the easiest thing? And you just said it beautifully. What's the easiest thing for the middle guy to do? Default back to, I cannot lose my job if I use the 10-year-old policy. And I hear it all the time. I love Kovac. I love securing the cloud. I love TIC 3.0. I love zero trust. But we've been doing it this way for 10 years, and there's still a policy I can relate to. OMB wiped all that out. That's what we need to do. So whatever policy we change for the future, whether it's widget policy or, duck policy, we need to make sure that is the policy. Get rid of the rest. We got plenty on our plate right now.
I think, the other part of this is, are we looking at those policies that are restrictive? I mean, there almost needs to be an agile effort by a cross-cutting group across government, defense and civilian, for those of us in industry that know what's holding back adoption, those in the government that know what's holding back, and to sit and put those things out on the table and to address those, because those are, to your point, it's frustrating, dealing with folks on the defense side. We know who our adversaries are. They are not held back by a TIC policy. They're not held back by these other policies we have and their ability to, whether it's leverage WhatsApp in an encrypted model or other things like that, or whatever cloud providers that they may have, where they come from, they are not encumbered by the policies that we have that are intended to protect us, that in many ways now are putting us in a worse situation. So I think, if I can put something out to the government folks in the room, to seriously consider some sort of a cross-cutting group to sit down to look at the policies and how do we move to an ability to change policies, because the ones that are frustrating for me, I deal with, I listen to the policies and I go, those were put out in the 70s and 80s, back literally when I was in uniform and all we had was paper. I can't encrypt a piece of paper. And I had to have two people open a safe to put it in the safe that had to be in my state, in my country, wherever. Those are outdated. And those things need to be addressed and changed for us to make the leap. All the tools are here. It's the policies that are tending to hold us back from being able to adopt and truly modernize.
You mentioned policies that are in place, but I spent my last 5 years in uniform, not that far from here in the Pentagon, in a policy shop. And there's a big difference between signing a policy and executing on that policy or enforcing some type of business process reengineering, right? So I would just say that I often tell my kids that change is not a change until you change. So having a policy is fine, getting a new policy on the street, but how hard is it in the government after the policy is in place to actually change? You mentioned a couple of policies that are forward thinking, but the implementation and the execution of those policies is not the same as just signing a piece of paper. So I would just say you have to follow through. And you have to do the hard part, which is changing business processes to enable that policy.
I kept RMF.
Yep. Where does that responsibility lie? Does that responsibility lie in the people that write the policy, or working with the agencies to understand their business processes, because each agency operates, a little differently. How can industry help with that? I mean, because there are some big policies out there that agencies, and there's no funding tied to them. So why do I need to do them? Is there any advice there? I mean, especially given your experience.
Yeah, I would say where industry can help is education and exposure. So if especially you're talking about security policies in particular in this conversation. So from a security policy perspective, having a security policy is one thing, like zero trust, et cetera, or TIC 3.0. But if industry can help communicate to organizations why those policies are important and what the risk is if you don't execute on X, Y, and Z, and what you're opening yourself up to, then once an agency has a greater understanding of the risk, then maybe they'll follow through on the policy.
No, that's excellent advice. So I know we're kind of out of time, or we're behind time, but I want to leave the audience with like an actionable takeaway, right? Like for the gentleman from State, and we heard his challenges, which I think are very common across government. Is there a piece of advice that you would offer in terms of, one, implementing a modernization effort or speeding up in a modernization effort? Like, do you start with a pilot, and can you offer, I would say, on either side of it, if an organization is in the middle and running into barriers, some of the barriers that we've talked about, are there things that they can do to, move a little bit faster?
Again, I'll steal some mechanisms that we attempt to use internally, which is, again, start with customer, work backwards, paint the long-term vision. And long-term now is not 5 years, right? That long-term vision, the pace of innovation today is 1 or 2 years out. But you can't, that's the big hit, right? From there, where do you start to get there? And have a plan, whether that's that pilot piece, that's the first step that gets iterative and it just continues to grow and snowball. Assume and do not be afraid and do not get penalized to fail. If we run around with we cannot fail, we're the government, we're DoD, we're civilian agencies, you're going to fail. Fail, learn, course change, continue to move towards that bigger vision you laid out. At times, look at the bigger vision because it's liable to change. Again, this pace of innovation is too fast. But I think having a plan that looks at the customer, looks at the long-term vision, works backward, and then moves toward that, assume you're going to fail, course correct as you go. And that never stops. That's not a one-time 2-year hit. That continues forever.
I would just say as a parting thought, you can get more done once you get started. So at the end of the day, in the government, we're really good at paralysis by analysis. And you can hypothesize, strategize, analyze, and theorize all you want. But at some point, you have to get started. So I would just say you can get more done once you get started. Anything we ever done that we were able to make progress, we had to stop talking about it and get moving.
Echo that. I would say the last thing is, when you're looking to start a project and you're looking to get going, don't always be fooled by buzzwords. Zero trust. Yes, zero trust is important, but don't be fooled by buzzwords. Don't be lured by the big glamorous, you guys that have for years been doing it one way and now they're going to tell you overnight they change. Open your mind to the newer innovative companies. Look what's happening and take the time to look what's going on outside of government. I was in the meeting with this the other day and I was just so impressed because the major in the room said, I look at what financials are doing. And I was like, wow, that's pretty intelligent. Here's a guy who's running this, security. He's going, I wonder what the financials are doing. So really, we have a tendency in government to go, so what's my buddy doing? And what's the word of the day? And what's the vendor of the day? And then we go call them. Open your mind. There are so many great companies out here that are doing some really, really cool stuff. And with cloud and cloud-based security tools, they can be as competitive as the big guys. And, take our time to look outside of government. And look, I'm a government guy, so I want everybody to stay in government. If we take that time, then we get started, and then we do it gives you a really much more open, much more visceral view of what's going on in the real world. Let's not get locked in our world.
No, thank you guys. That's great advice. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of this takes leadership, You guys are leaders within your organization. You guys have been leaders working and supporting agencies. I'd say for agencies, these people are available. Your partner agencies, there are people doing things, and don't be afraid to have conversations, because I think dialogue and collaboration is going to help you kind of move things forward. So with that, I want to thank our panelists. We're going to take a 5-10 minute stretch break. If you have questions for them, please come up. And then we have some great actual case studies from agencies, the FBI, Navy, and National Science Foundation that have actually started, deployed, and implemented some modernization efforts. So please stay for that. And thank you again. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.